Welcome back to A Slice of News, where I cut you off a slice of news. Secretary of State Marco Rubio demands that State Department go back to using Times New Roman as their official typeface instead of Calibri. That sounds like a parody headline you'd read in something like The Onion, but actually it's completely true. The Secretary of State told diplomats to move back to Times New Roman for their official communication type and undo what he called a wasteful diversity move. Of all the things the Secretary of State could be using his time and energy on, he's choosing to use it on a declaration about a typeface. The move to Calibri from Times New Roman was implemented by the previous Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, citing that it was more accessible for people with disabilities because it did not have the decorative angular features that Times New Roman did, and that it was the default in Microsoft products, which is true. So once again, the administration sees some sort of inclusion or ease of use into that. Not on my watch. Secretary of State Rubio justified his move away from the typeface and back to Times New Roman in an internal department cable, stating that it was to, quote, restore decorum and professionalism to the department's written work products and abolish yet another wasteful DEIA program. The department is returning to Times New Roman as its standard typeface, adding that this formatting standard aligns with the President's One Voice for America's Foreign Relations Directive, underscoring the department's responsibility to present a unified, professional voice in all communications. So we're basically at a point where the administration is calling certain typefaces too woke to be used in official capacity. It seems like such a pointless thing to care about. They're claiming that Calibri lacks decorum and professionalism, yet it is the default typeface in the Microsoft Word program, which is predominantly used in a professional setting to do word processing. So if there was any sort of real validity to this claim by the Secretary that Calibri is unprofessional, basically, Microsoft would not have set it as the default typeface. So that doesn't really make sense as an argument. This move seems far less about trying to project a unified professional voice in all communications and just be about, well, if the Biden administration did it, we need to undo it. And labeling it as DEI makes it far too easy for them to say it needs to be eliminated. As soon as something is labeled a DEI, conservatives think it is the worst and has to be disposed of because they feel DEI is anti-white and anti-men. And so what they're really doing is restoring normalcy and equality by eliminating diversity and equality. Because obviously this was about typeface, but it wasn't really about typeface. It's about sending a message, a very petty message, but a message nonetheless, that anyone that is not a white man without any issues reading text on a screen, your needs do not matter to this current administration. But of course, since they can't just come out and say only white people matter, they have to say, oh no, this is about professionalism and a unified voice. Times New Roman is a very antiquated looking font, which I guess is appropriate for a very antiquated minded group, which is the Republican Party. Times New Roman was commissioned all the way back in 1931 for use in the British newspaper The Times. It's not just old style, it's just old. There doesn't really seem to me any solid argument for clinging to it so desperately, other than, I suppose, some sort of appeal to a return and preservation of tradition. But it doesn't really serve any practical purpose in this case, especially. The Calibri typeface is much more contemporary. It was created back in 2002 and gained wider adoption in 2006 when it was included in Windows Vista. A fun little bit of typeface trivia for you. It was a font specifically designed to be more easily read on LCD monitors, which, considering most professional and really just general communications are done through screens that maximizes readability on those screens, should be the default everywhere. People aren't printing out their emails to read every morning. In the digital age, it only makes sense to be using a typeface that was not only designed in the digital age, but designed specifically to be used in it. Not one from the 1930s intended to be used in a printed newspaper. But like I alluded to before, this is not really just about changing a font. They want a sense of return of traditionalism back when things were the way we remember them, not all this modern new stuff. We want to go back to the way things used to be, the way they've always been. Another typographical fun fact that they either did not know, or at least hope nobody else knows, is that before 2004, Times New Roman wasn't even the default typeface for State Department communications. Back then it was Courier New. So their long tradition of using Times New Roman at the State Department dates back, at most, only 20 years. Secretary Rubio claimed that reversing the decision to move from Times New Roman to Calibri had to be undone because it was unnecessary. If anything, changing it back seems unnecessary, because that thing he's changing it back to only dates back to the beginning of the second George W. Bush administration. This move is really just about eliminating anything that the Biden administration put into play, because this administration thinks everything Biden is bad. And we have a president who's obsessed with putting his mark on everything around him. So he needs to take everything with the Biden name away so he can put the Trump name on it and say, yes, I did that. I took away the woke typeface of Calibri so we can go back to the great and traditional Times New Roman, and everyone will thank me for it, the great Donald J. Trump. But it really leaves me wondering, was there really anyone within the State Department that felt that the use of Calibri was unprofessional, and that they opined for the return to the much more austere and professional Times New Roman? I doubt it. Considering just how many older people work in the State Department, and just how many cables and emails and inter-office communications they have to read on a daily basis, I can't imagine they didn't welcome a typeface that made all that reading a lot easier and putting less of a strain on their eyes. While it is true that the move to Calibri back in 2023 was recommended by diversity and development groups in the US government, they are not the only ones who are benefiting from its usage. So in their haste to eliminate all diversity and inclusion anythings, what they're then doing is inconveniencing their own people for a move that really doesn't accomplish anything at all, other than being able to say it's one more DEI thing they took away, taking out the woke out of the US government. This is just an administration that does not like diversity and does not like inclusion in any of its forms. And let's also not forget, Marco Rubio himself, the Secretary of State, is the son of Cuban immigrants who were not citizens when he was born. Being against diversity and inclusion is in some ways being against himself. He's thrown his lot in with an administration that is largely white supremacist, so I guess he's just riding it for as long as he can until they realize that he's a non-white and maybe he needs to be eliminated as part of getting rid of DEI too. The claim that the switch to Calibri from Times New Roman was somehow wasteful is, of course, completely fabricated and complete nonsense. But if we want to talk waste, like actually talk about waste, in a lot of ways, Times New Roman is actually the wasteful one. If we're talking purely about ink on paper, since printing out all those additional serifs on all those characters, while minuscule on their own, of course add up when you're printing out thousands of pages of documents using so much more ink than they would have to if they use a sans serif font like Calibri. So by that logic, actually switching to Calibri was less wasteful, and they've now made a decision that is more wasteful in an intangible quantitative sense, instead of just wasteful in a vague, less definable way that's just a way of, well, Biden did it and we don't like it. It is being used for inclusion, and that's not what we're about. I'm sure if they had been able to get away with it, they would have liked to have switched from a serif to a sans serif font, and so they could market it as, look at how much money we're saving the American taxpayer on all this wasted ink that those woke Biden era people were forcing us to waste by making us use those serif fonts. That, of course, would be complete nonsense, but not any less nonsense than the actual nonsense that they actually did here. This administration simply will not pass up on any opportunity, no matter how minuscule or petty it may be, anything that even seems to help out someone that is not white or a man, or that has any sort of disability of any sort. At this point, I'm almost waiting for them to announce they've decided to undo the Americans with Disabilities Act for being too woke. And I really have to hope I didn't just manifest that into existence. Bottom line, this administration is petty and vindictive and I can only hope that it won't be long before they are put in the past, and we can get an administration leading this country that cares about all Americans. And that care and inclusion isn't just written off as woke DEI. I think that's something we as a nation deserve. Alright guys, that'll be it for this episode of A Slice of News. I've been your host, Mr. Slice, and until next time, when I cut you off another slice of news.